Professor Mukpiton over allegations of partisanship. In a statement signed by spokesman Bolaji Abdullahi, the party said the emergence of a 2023 pro-Bola Tinubu social media post allegedly linked to the INEC chairman raises serious concerns about the credibility of the electoral body. The EDC also stated that this development undermines public confidence and calls the Commission's neutrality into question. The party further alleged attempts to alter digital records to conceal past political affiliations, describing the move as a threat to transparency and accountability. It stressed that an electoral umpire must not only be independent, but also be perceived as impartial at all times. The ADC further disclosed plans to escalate its response by updating petitions to relevant institutions, including foreign governments and the Nigerian Bar Association. It added that it would intensify civil disobedience actions until the INEC chairman steps down from office. While the calls for the resignation of the INEC chairman, they're gaining traction, especially online, where many Nigerians have published claims linking the professor to the controversial X handle, including a phone number and email address allegedly linked to that handle. For a conversation around these and more, we have policy analyst Professor Anthony Keller, who joins us now. Good afternoon, Professor. Many thanks for being here.
Good afternoon. Good to be here.
Great to have you as always. Now, what do you make of these calls by the ADC? From your perspective, do you see the INEC chairman as partisan?
Well, I think it's a very unfortunate situation for the country to find ourselves in such a situation with, barely a year to election time and barely just a few weeks to a lot of important deadlines. It is difficult to dispute the feeling of the ADC and other opposition members. One might, argue against the method or the strategy they're using, but one can see why they can feel bad. If they truly feel that the umpire is not independent, let alone affiliated to one of the side, then of course they want to ask for their resignation. That's a very important thing. But if I were the one advising, I think what we ought to be looking for, and perhaps it's a bit late, but it's never too late to do the right thing, is actually process more than the person. I'm very worried that if the system remains the same and they bring in a new INEC chairman, there's nothing stopping from that person to do the same thing that Professor Mukpiton is doing. I think what parties need to ask for is a process that is transparent, that is inclusive, and that ensures that nobody feels marginalized or worked against. But that said, there are some issues here that are very simple and yet very complicated. This issue of having a Twitter account is either somebody's mistaken or somebody's lying. If it turns out that my colleague, a professor of law, is lying about having an account, that's a very grave thing. If I were in his shoes, if the account is mine, I'll come out and say, yes, it was mine, but that doesn't mean I cannot do my job well. We need to look at the process. But, if it's not his own and they're misunderstanding him, then that is not good either. But, he can overlook that. What we cannot overlook is if the professor of law is lying to the public. That would be a very grave thing. I think, but it's all a series of unfortunate things that is going on. You can understand the stance of the opposition party. Of course they want him to go. I'm not surprised at all. I'm even surprised it took them long. I do not think they're asking him to go just because of the Twitter account or the Twitter tweets. I think that is the latest thing. I think they stopped liking or trusting him when he took away their chairman and their secretary. And I'd like to say, I think he did that too lightly as well.
All right, Professor Killer. Some would say that he's a victim of circumstance, that all our hands and all fingers should be pointed towards the Electoral Act. Because if the Electoral Act still remains the same, and in terms of appointment and the rest of them, why would you probably shoot the messenger?
Oh, can you say that again? Sorry, I didn't hear you very well.
All right, so I spoke. So some are saying that Professor Mupita is a victim of circumstance. That all fingers should be pointed towards the Electoral Act. That if the Electoral Act remains unchanged in terms of appointments, why should the messenger
Not to be looking at? That is why I think, while it is understandable to ask for the resignation or removal, I think instead of resignation, if you're asking for his removal actually, instead of asking for his removal or resignation, what they should be looking at is the process and the approach. I think that is what will guarantee that the next person, or whoever that is, or the same person, does not do things that would appear to be against a part in the competition. It's about the act, it's about the process. That is where I stand too. But again, I want to be very clear on this. I understand why they want him to resign. If they feel he's against them, then he's not, he cannot be trusted, so you can understand why.
Well, Professor, since you're talking about not necessarily the focus should go into the process as opposed to just removing the resignation or removal of the INEC chairman, why don't we have both? If indeed he's found to be lying, like you alluded to earlier on, if the INEC chairman is found to be lying to the Nigerian people, you did say that is a very that's very significant, negatively, of course. If we look at removing someone that may be lying, if he's found to be lying, and also look at the process, would that be more robust?
Oh, well, I totally agree with you. That's a strong enough reason. If he has an account and he says, I don't have the account, and he's issued a statement saying he hasn't got an account, and he turns out to have the Twitter account, that is enough reason to remove him. I mean, and the lesson there is that technically, actually, there's nothing wrong with him in that thing. In the opening of his book, I think the man died. Wole Soyinka wrote, the reason of my arrest is different, detention is different from my arrest. His real crime is not having the account. It might be a sin to have the account. It might be a sin to have tweeted that things. The real crime is to lie, to say the account is not mine, or I did not tweet those things. That is enough reason, enough grounds to remove him, not even to resign.
But
so to that extent, yes, the two things can be asked for.
Yeah, but in terms of the process,
Because if he lies on that, then you cannot trust him on other things.
Yes, but in terms of the process that you talked about, that would be more profitable in the long run. What would make this process less frustrating? Because of course we can anticipate that some would kick against reviewing the process because the current situation favors them. So what would make this airtight?
In terms of process and approach, there are ways to go about the job of INEC chairman, and I think regardless of if he is independent or affiliated or not to the APC, I think he has taken some wrong steps. For example, when he was about to choose the date, I think he could have called a meeting and agreed those dates with the party chairman and secretary rather than announcing it and changing those dates. That is consultation. When they chose the date, for example, and then they had to change that date because it falls on the Muslim calendar, I personally would not have cared if it falls on the Muslim calendar. I do not believe that because it's a religious day you cannot vote. That's a wrong attitude. But given that I'm in the minority, given that most Nigerians think so, his lack of considering that is a lack of consideration. He should have done that. The announcement of validation of a permanent voter's card to then change your mind is a sign of inability to foresee things well. So that means there was not enough consideration, consultation, and enough communication to make those choices. So to that extent, I think so far so bad for the new INEC chairman because his decisions do not appear to be thorough. They do not appear to be consulted. They do not appear to be well considered. And that is why you have this back and forth. And that is what opens him to be frameable and to be being, to be subject of attack and suspicion. If he had carried along the parties, there are many political parties in Nigeria. They can fill any sizable room if they sent in 2 or 3 delegates to just sit with them and say, let us plan the dates together, let us process this together. That kind of process will be less acrimonious in a country where politics is so divided and so important for the people. I think those are the lessons this chairman and any future chairman should learn.
All right, Professor Killer, as we try to wrap up, what can INEC do to save face? What can INEC do to repair what seems to be a broken wall at this point in time?
Well, I think at this point, given this Twitter thing, they need to investigate. If it is true that he had a Twitter account and he lied that he had it, he should go. If it turns out that it is not true, then they should improve the process. Then he should understand. I think the onus is on the chairman himself. If he can overcome this allegation of having a tweet that he denies having. If it is true that the Twitter is not his own, then he has to say, I realize I have a trust issue. Let us work together to overcome that issue. Not to say I don't care or not to just keep fighting. I think that would be wrong. And I'd like to advise the people in the government party from the presidency to support us to stop intervening. It is not the duty of the presidency, it is not the duty of the APC to support the INEC chairman. They should focus on their campaign, they should focus on governing, and let the INEC chairman deal with the opposition and deal with everybody.
Indeed. We'd like to thank you for your analysis, policy analyst, Professor